Hi, folks. Rob Goller here. Thanks for joining me again for our weekly chats about local history. This week, in honor of the upcoming 4th of July holiday, here in East Aurora, we celebrate on the 3rd of July. But in any event, Independence Day, I want to talk a little bit about the history of fireworks in our community. Last year, I look back at what I talked about during the live stream last year, and I talked about fireworks displays and the history of the official fireworks displays in the years that we didn't have fireworks in Hamlin Park or at the country club was where they had them before. But this year I came across something really interesting. As I've said before, I occasionally go through the old newspapers 50 years ago, 100 years ago to try to find something interesting. Um, and in the course of doing that, in 1924, I came across in May and June articles about the village of East Aurora banning the sale of fireworks. And this caught my eye because I had researched this topic before, but I had read and written about, and just a teaser, it'll be coming out in one of my upcoming books, this topic. 4th of July is a big topic that I've written about, but is in 1940, the village board had banned the sale of fireworks. And I thought, well, they banned them in 1940, and now I'm seeing it in 1924 as I was perusing through some of the newspapers. Well, as it turned out, we have, and I've, this happens quite a bit where I'll publish something, or I think I'm done with my research, and then I'll accidentally find something more that either adds to it or completely discounts some of the things that I've written about. In this case, it's a little bit more than I wasn't wrong to begin with, but I'm learning a lot more about it, which is wonderful. That's what's great about history is there's always more to be learned. But in I discovered 1924. I came across this article, and of course I started digging some more. The village board approved a ban on the sale of fireworks, but only um, outside of July 1st through July 4th. So you could still buy fireworks at local stores, which is quite interesting because when I was a kid, and some of the laws here in New York have changed, but when I was a kid, we just always thought that fireworks were banned. There were a couple things that you could buy, but most of the time, uh, people would either drive down to Pennsylvania and bring back their illegal fireworks, quote unquote. And we always thought it was interesting. It was always sort of a taboo thing to have people who would be shooting off fireworks privately in their backyards and things like that. But the state ban goes back to 1941. But in 1940, East Aurora had approved a ban. But even before that, 1924, um, the village board, they were concerned, partly because of the injuries that had happened with the private use of fireworks. And you'll read about this a lot in national newspapers. Not necessarily any incident here that led the village board to do this. But in 1924, in May of 24, they approved a ban on fireworks. However, you could still purchase them between July 1st and July 4th. But if July 4th was on a Sunday, they would extend it to July 5th because a lot of people would actually observe the Sabbath, observe Sunday. The official celebrations in places like East Aurora would not occur on July 4th if the 4th landed on a Sunday. It would be moved to the 5th. So you could buy fireworks here in East Aurora between July 1st and July 5th. And local stores would sell them. You could just go down to the confectionery store, department store, and they would have displays, and you could buy fireworks here in the village. And this was the case in many, many towns. What was happening is stores were, it's sort of like the Christmas phenomenon, where it feels like stores are bringing out their Christmas decorations earlier and earlier each year. Well, what was happening is stores were bringing out the fireworks earlier and earlier each year. And the village and lots of small villages like ours here in East Aurora and some towns across the state, across the United States, were encountering this problem where people were buying their fireworks earlier and earlier, and they were just shooting them off whenever, not just for the 4th of July. So fireworks would start as soon as the weather was turning good. So people would be shooting off fireworks here in the village of East Aurora indiscriminately, according to the mayor at the time. He did an article, one of his editorials in the East Aurora Advertiser, um, and so to prevent that, and it was be at night. On the 4th of July, you expect it. And as some people have issues with fireworks, but you at least know that they're going to happen on the 4th of July. But these fireworks were going off indiscriminately. There was like today, you technically need a permit to shoot off fireworks, um, but then they were just shooting them off. And so the villagers were concerned about that, and they were getting kind of annoyed actually at night trying to go to sleep, and you hear the fireworks going off. So they adopted this law, and they were hoping that it would curb the problem where to not discourage fireworks on the 4th of July or surrounding the 4th of July, so the 1st through the 5th of July, um, not only banning the sale of them, but also banning the use of them within the village. There was limited success. Trying to enforce it is a problem like it would be today, where people would shoot them off and then disappear, or you weren't quite sure where the fireworks were being shot off. So limited success, but it was successful. So you could still buy at local stores between the 1st and the 5th. And according to some of the things I saw in the newspaper, and I'm going to add this to the articles, at least one article I've written about fireworks, because I did not know this 1924 bit part of it. And it just happens to be 100 years ago that this started, where the ban outside the 4th of July. And it's funny to read the legislation because they basically say, oh, it has been tradition that we use fireworks to celebrate the 4th of July, our independence, and we don't want to infringe on that. But outside of that, we need to have a ban on them. Um, so a lot of the store owners seemed to be okay with that. They were still making their money. They could still sell their fireworks for the 4th of July, and they would have their special displays. Move forward to 1940, and there were a couple village board members, one in particular, who was very concerned about the injuries that were happening. And even though, like I said before, I could not find anywhere there was a specific injury from fireworks that led to the village board enacting this law. But they approved a law in 1940 that banned the sale of fireworks completely. So the July 4th, Independence Day of 1940, was the first time that there was no sale legally allowed of fireworks in East Aurora, in the village limits. The problem with this was sale and use of fireworks. So you technically could not shoot off fireworks in the village either. The problem with this law was that it only applied to the corporate limits of the village of East Aurora. So in the town outside the village, you could still purchase fireworks. So one store, which was at the corner of Main and Hamlin, they actually set up a stand on Hamlin Avenue at the village line. And I don't know all the details because they didn't publish this, but there was an ad in the East Aurora Advertiser for this store on Main Street, and then they said you could purchase the fireworks at the store or at this stand that was set up on Hamlin Avenue at the village line, and they used those terms, at the village line. My assumption is that because they could not legally sell fireworks in the village limits, that you could probably place an order at the store and just have to go outside the village limits on Hamlin Avenue to finalize the purchase and pick up your fireworks. So the store was operating this stand outside the village limits, so they could legally sell the fireworks, which I thought was a very interesting workaround to the village law. So it really did not work as planned. The village board only had jurisdiction over the village limits, and so this store somehow either had somebody they knew that they lived down at the end of Hamlin Avenue, and so it was a little inconvenient. But if people still wanted fireworks, they were going to get their fireworks, and the store was still making the money from the fireworks. So all you had to do was place your order at the store on Main Street, but you had to officially purchase it. So there was no law against placing an order, but you couldn't actually make the transaction here in the village, so you had to go outside the village limits. So for that 1 year, that's what was happening. So the village officially had a ban on fireworks, but there were still fireworks being set off, even though the police department had been telling everybody that they would be strictly enforcing the law. There were still fireworks reported throughout the village, as has happened since. This whole village ordinance became a moot point the next year in 1941 because New York State passed a ban on fireworks. So the village law was superseded by the state. The law has changed several times since then, but that was the first time that the state enacted a statewide ban on the sale of fireworks. And then, of course, the job of the village police department then became enforcing the state law. And they actually said that in the newspaper. They warned people that they would be enforcing the law strictly. Whether or not they could do that is really there was opinions against that they weren't really. There were people actually you could sense in the newspaper that were upset that the law wasn't being enforced, but it was kind of difficult to enforce. Like I said earlier, that you didn't, if someone was shooting off a couple fireworks, it was very difficult to find them if someone were to call in a complaint to the police department. So the statewide ban was in effect, and so you couldn't just go outside the village limits to buy fireworks. Everybody was on the same page beginning in 1941. One of the things that the local civic leaders did was prior to 1941 was to encourage people to not buy fireworks privately, illegally or otherwise, but to give that money they would otherwise be using to purchase fireworks for their own backyard displays and give it to the effort locally at Hamlin Park. And the American Legion at the time had sponsored the fireworks displays, and several groups over the years have sponsored the fireworks displays. But one of the things the civics leaders did was say, can you just give the money to that effort and we can have a bigger and better fireworks display in Hamlin Park rather than everybody shooting off these fireworks not so safely in their backyards throughout the community. So that was one of the efforts. Again, limited success, but more success than not, according to the papers you'll read in subsequent years, the reports. It was similar to Halloween. They would always have the week after the 4th of July or the week after the Halloween, the police would come out with a statement saying, it was a quiet Halloween, or this happened and there was some mischief, and they would give sort of a report on Halloween. Well, the same thing happened the 4th of July. They would oftentimes in the East Aurora Advertiser publish, the police chief would come out with a statement saying, we've had, very few problems, or if they did have problems, they would report on it. But in most cases, there seemed to be very few problems here in the village, especially after the fireworks ban was put in place. You couldn't, especially after the statewide ban, you couldn't just go elsewhere and buy fireworks and bring them back in, unless you drove all the way down to Pennsylvania, which is what people have been doing for the past several decades. So interesting question about fireworks here in East Aurora that I just kind of stumbled upon. And this was the case. It's not just for East Aurora. A lot of small towns had their own bans and regulations on fireworks. And in many small towns, people seem to always find a way around it and be able to have their own backyard displays, whether or not there was a law on the books in their particular village or town. So thank you for joining me for this discussion. As always, thanks for bringing the comments and the topic ideas. Working on a couple things at the moment. My brain is going back and forth between topics right now. But this one I wanted to bring to you a week before the 4th of July, and hopefully you found it interesting, as much as interesting as I found it. Thanks for joining me. Please, some people have asked about sending along topic ideas. Don't be afraid to do so. Send an email, put it in the comments. I'm open to any and all ideas, and I do promise I'll get to lots of things. I have about 12 ideas officially that I've written down on my list that I'm trying to get to. So please be patient if you've given me an idea and I haven't gotten to it yet. Again, thanks for joining me. Thank you for keeping history alive, and we'll see you next time.